I support Donald Trump. The reason being is that the fact that he embraces Christianity makes me want to vote for him as in if I'm a citizen over there.
I support Kamala Harris because I think she's suitable for the presidential role, and she's black herself. She doesn't support racism.
I think Trump is a bit too dangerous for this world. Kamala Harris is better for Africa because we know more nations will come towards.
Personally, I support Trump. Reason. According to him, racism. I support all the American people.
Na minha modesta opinião, eu acho que não tem de ser a Kamala presidente dos Estados Unidos, tinha de ser mesmo o Trump por causa das políticas para a África.
Eu não tenho preferência tanto para Kamala, sei que independentemente dela vencer ou perder, nada vai mudar para mim como jovem, negra, africana. Be pior com Trump.
I am leaning towards Trump's administration rather than Harris. I do want the Trump administration to win because I don't believe American hands should be involved in Africa.
I generally believe whatever the U.S. president is gonna be after the election, it would have a great impact.
Let me go for Kamala. It's Kamala Harris. Personally, I just don't like Donald Trump. He's like very childish from what I've seen on politics. Let me go for the woman. Women would rule the world, yeah.
My choice, I'd say Trump. Yeah, I'd say Trump. Mainly because I'm looking at his decisions on corporate taxes. I've heard him say they want to reduce corporate taxes. Which is
between the two candidates, I would like to see Donald Trump again come to be elected as the president of the United States because, of course, his speech according to different crises.
Moi, personnellement, je suis pour le leadership féminin. Et déjà que Madame Kamala Harris vient se présenter, j'ai hâte de voir qu'est-ce qu'elle va nous présenter, son cahier des charges, et comment elle compte défendre le leadership féminin.
C'est pas question de choix, mais on aimerait voir pour la première fois de l'histoire une femme diriger les États-Unis. Pourquoi pas Kamala Harris?
Eh bien, moi, je dirais Trump, parce qu'il est venu avec une politique assez claire. Il faut savoir que les États-Unis d'Amérique ont aussi besoin de l'Afrique. Et je pense que si aujourd'hui, ces élections, s'il y a aujourd'hui des couacs, ça va fortement se répercuter sur l'Afrique.
All right. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joe Hatagwa. I am the founder and CEO of Authentic African. And if you are watching this video, then you want to know, how will the U.S. election impact Africa? We got a chance to hear from some Africans themselves, citizens, those living on the continent, who they prefer as their candidates. And today I want to hear from you guys. I'm going to give you my thoughts. We've done something like this similar. We've done something similar to this a little earlier this year, around July of this year, when it became clear who were the two candidates. And so now that we are at that place where we know who the two folks are, the question now is, who is better for Africa? So first of all, I want you guys to tell me, can you guys hear me? And can you guys tell me where you're watching from? So if you guys can just put it in the comments where you're watching from and if you can hear me. I just want to make sure you guys can all hear me and none of that was in vain. So you guys can let me know that. I know this is kind of a last minute live stream where we started about 15 minutes late. So I just want to apologize for the tardiness, but it has been a wild and crazy day with daylight savings. And so for those of you on the continent of Africa, you'll notice that the time has not changed for you. But for those of us in the United States, the time has changed. It is an hour earlier now because, of course, we do daylight savings time. So no comments, nobody's saying where they're watching from. Is this one of those ones where people are watching, but they don't want to say where they're watching from, and they don't want to call themselves out? So let's react to that video, right? There were a couple of things that I saw in that video that I thought were interesting. what was interesting is the only people who talked about policy in that video to some degree, if you noticed, were the Trump supporters and those who you could see were outside of the college environment, the school environment, right? What I saw was folks that I saw a lawyer, I saw someone else. Somebody mentioned corporate tax, right? He said, I want to vote for him because of corporate tax. And then I saw a young lady in college that said, I want to vote for her because, he acts childless, and she, I want to see women's leadership. And I think that that's interesting because I think it's very different in the United States in general, right? What I've seen in the United States in general is folks who, it's kind of flipped. People who talk mostly about policy, I find, generally are on the left side of the political aisle, and folks who talk about feelings and ideas are mostly on the right side of the political aisle that I see in the United States. And I do see people talk about the idea of not necessarily policy, but rhetoric on the right. So right on the right, people will talk about tariffs, or on the right, people will talk about you need a strong person. They talk about somebody mentioned Christianity in this video. So those are the things that I hear in general in the United States, right? These are things that are about bigger ideas and feelings, and people saying where they want the country to go, which direction they want the country to be in, and they feel like we're moving wayward or far away from where they expect the country to be. Generally on the left, what I hear is people speaking about specific things like Roe v. Wade. They talk about, a lot of people on the left talk about affirmative action. People on the left talk about Project 2025, right? And so I've seen a very different take from in the States than what I saw on the continent. So I thought it was interesting. It was interesting to follow along and to see what people thought. But again, I'd like to hear from you all. There's a few of you on here. I know we're kind of last minute. I didn't get a chance to promote this, but I'd love to hear from you guys. I mean, tomorrow's a very big day, right? Tomorrow is election day. I have voted already, and I have been told on many occasions not to discuss who I vote for on these platforms. And so what I will do is I will speak from what I hear from people on both sides as it pertains to Africa. And I want to get you guys' thoughts on this. So the first thing I'll say is, if you speak to any Pan-Africanist on the continent, they will say it doesn't matter who is the US president. Neither one is good for Africa, right? In general, that is what you'll find people will say on the continent. Many of them will say they don't care who's president, regardless of where they lean, right? I know people who have socialist values, who lean left, that don't care if Donald Trump wins. I know people who are conservative and are Pan-Africanists and don't care if Kamala Harris wins. Because in both instances, they've said it doesn't matter who it is over there, they do not have a good impact over here, meaning those people who are living on the continent. So let me express to you what I've heard from folks personally, and what I see as the trends in terms of how people are communicating the benefits of each of these folks. So first things first, some people really like Trump, like based on what the young lady from Ethiopia said in the video. Some people really like Trump because they say he's going to have a hands-off policy, right? Trump has been seen by many people who oppose him as an isolationist. He is a nationalist, right? He'll probably consider himself a nationalist. And so what that means is areas where many people who in the US might feel like they should be allies, Trump doesn't necessarily subscribe to those same things. Now, so that would be the argument they give for Trump. The argument they say against Harris in that same vein is that in a lot of cases, what you're finding is that America has not only been discussing the idea of democracy and capitalism around the world, But also what you find is the social values of the United States tend to be part of the conversations that the US has with other countries, especially countries that the US has the upper hand in terms of their trade with countries, right? So, for example, most of the continent of Africa does not have a favorable trade agreement with the United States, if they even have one, right? In general, right, the United States, of course, has the upper hand, as anybody would try to do in any negotiation that you do. However, the United States does, in many cases, push for countries to follow the general uh, social norms that the United States has developed, over the last 30 to 40 years, right? So the idea of inclusiveness, and that would mean marginalized groups that many people on the continent of Africa would see as groups that don't deserve to have a voice, right? So that would be LGBTQ, that would be, really in that vein. That's generally where I hear most people say they do not want America to push those values on Africa. You'll even find that some people on the continent of Africa will say those things did not exist if not for the West coming to the continent of Africa. I think there's some people, many historians, that will dispute that, but that is the way people think, right? And so that is kind of the case that they make for the political right, right? The case that people make for the political left is Kamala Harris has gone to the continent of Africa. She herself has said she wants to see relations with Africa expand. She, as a vice presidential candidate, has visited the continent of Africa. I was there when she was there. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has gone a couple of times. And so there's this concept of the idea that the United States is looking to expand its relations with the continent of Africa. And so there are people on the continent of Africa who also agree with some of the social norms that the United States has. And so they feel like some of those should be brought to the continent of Africa. There are other areas too where I see that people see a reasoning for supporting the Harris regime. I think a lot of that has to do with just general leftist ideas and policies, Medicare for all, things that many people would like to see on the continent of Africa. And I think some people hope that some of that will get, if that ever, well, first of all, Medicare for all is not going to happen under Harris administration, but it is something that she had supported at one point in time in the past. And so people would like to think, those kinds of things would get passed and exported. But I would say in general, like I said, in general, the idea is that for most people you speak to, no matter who wins, it's not going to have a direct benefit for the continent of Africa. Here is what I believe. I do believe that the continent of Africa now needs more than ever to no longer be dependent on the outside world, other continents. What I mean is that there should be more intra-continental trade. I'm not sure how much you guys are all aware of this, but it's not really easy to travel around the continent of Africa. You have to get visa. Certain countries are biased against other countries for visas, right? So, I've spoken about this before. I worked for a multinational firm, Jumia, based in Ghana, and two people weren't able to go. One, I think, was Tunisian, and then the other one for sure was in Nigeria. And we were going to Egypt for a company-wide sales retreat, and Egypt made it very difficult for the Nigerian to get his visa. He's not a felon. He's worked a job for, at that time, I think about 10 or 11 years in the advertising world. He worked for a large multinational firm that had an office in Egypt, and they still gave him the runaround. So he lives in Lagos. Abuja is a 3-hour flight away, if I'm not mistaken. That's the new capital of Nigeria. He had to fly to Abuja, go to the Egyptian embassy in Abuja, just to see that the guy wasn't even there that he was supposed to meet with. He goes home. He's asked to come back again for them to deny him the visa. to go to Egypt. So they basically gave him the runaround and just said no. Now, it would be absurd for Germany to do that to England, right? It would be absurd. Like if someone, first of all, there's not even a question, right? If you're a British citizen, if you notice that Europeans travel all around to all different countries in Europe all the time. They make it easy. There are different railways and roads and highways that make it really, really easy to go between countries in Europe. For whatever reason, the continent of Africa makes it difficult to go between countries in Africa. And so what that means is that trade becomes a little bit more difficult, right? If you have border countries that have their own issues and they have all kinds of charges that they charge you to bring stuff into one country or to make stuff go out of another country, it makes it very difficult to trade between countries. So because of that way of separation, which of course was done by colonization, there are two tribes that are on either side of a dividing line that, although they're culturally similar, their main languages that they communicate within their countries are different, right? So, one might be speaking French, one might be speaking English because of the colonial barriers, right? This side was an English side, this side was the French side. And so the reason why I bring that up is because I do think that, there are a lot of people who are hoping that whoever is in office in the United States, that person is going to give more handouts to the continent of Africa, right? They're going to do more giving, right? And what I have seen is both candidates have said they don't want to do that, and for different reasons, right? So I've seen with Trump, he has said, and this is, people dispute this, but he said these are shithole countries. And so in his opinion, I don't think he, even if he didn't say that, let's say he didn't say that. He is a person who does not want to, as a nationalist, right? He doesn't want to be supporting other countries with any way financially, right? That his opinion is that funding should be back in the United States. On the opposite side of the aisle, what I've seen from the Harris administration, or soon to be Harris administration, and folks from the Biden administration, is they also don't want to just be giving out handouts. Their approach to the conversation has been more business collaboration. Trump also has said something along the lines of, there was a statement I played in the previous live stream we did when we talked about who's better. He had mentioned that he has friends who are really interested in Africa and who think, they're making a fortune in Africa. And so he likes the idea of maybe some people personally generating some wealth in Africa, but it doesn't seem that he has too much of an idea or belief system around the United States partnering in any major way beyond what's already happening with, the oil and gas companies that are all over the continent. Exxon, Shell, all those companies are all over the continent of Africa currently and doing business there. So I do think that there is a major difference in terms of how they want to approach, but I think in terms of their overall thought process, their overall thought process seems very similar. How they want to approach it seems different, right? In terms of no more just aid, right? It should be, one says no more aid and nothing at all or very little. The other one says no more aid, let's turn it into, partnerships. Either way, Africa is never going to advance as long as each country operates independently with larger countries outside the continent of Africa. So, for example, you guys see now what's happening in the Sahel states, right? Where they've decided that they are going to collectively work on foreign policy, governments, and a whole bunch of other things. And so that means that, with the Sahel states, you have 3 different countries which have 3 different sets of massive mineral deposits, right? Burkina Faso has gold. I think, which one is it? Mali has oil. And, forgive me if I'm getting it wrong. Niger, I don't remember what Niger has, but just know that the 3 of them together can negotiate much better agreements than they can apart and individually. And so right now, the continent of Africa is broken up into 54 and what you might say 51 disparate countries, all too small to negotiate any major deal with any country, whether that's France, Germany, Europe, anywhere in Europe, or the Americas, or even in Asia and Russia, right? And so what you have is you have these disparate deals being done. So China has agreed to do, what was it, $500 billion with the continent of Africa. $50 million was earmarked for Sierra Leone, right? Now, that was an Africa-China summit where many of the African leaders met, but they also met individually with China. Imagine had they all come together as this collection of 54 countries and said, together, we are going to negotiate for all of our needs, right? So, you DRC have all of these minerals. So, we can really leverage you in terms of our communications with other folks. Nothing leaves this country unless we have X, Y, and Z with this country, with this country, with this country, meaning nothing leaves the DRC unless we have these kinds of deals in place. And then the same thing with oil. Like, Nigeria now is doing oil refining. It's no longer just crude oil, but they'll be refining oil in Nigeria as well. And so then they can say, we will export our oil to Europe or whatever, but, we got to work as a collective, whatever it's the West African, the ECOWAS or Africa in general, and say, here are the things we need to see in these other deals. Unfortunately, each individual deal means that there's always going to be slow progress and no major progress. And so it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, who the president of the United States is as it pertains to the advancement of Africa, because every deal done with the continent of Africa is not done with the continent of Africa. It's done with individual countries, which has no standing in any of these meetings. You'll find that all the trading that is done, the North Atlantic Trade Organization, the NATO, and all of these, right? You'll have countries in Africa that sometimes become non-member partners or friends, but they don't ever really get a seat at the table. Pro Women says, excellent points, Joe. Waving hey from Chicago. Shout out to you, Pro Women. So that's what I believe. That is really my belief system. That's the way I see it. In my opinion, I do not see any real value either way. I have my own personal belief systems about who I would prefer to see in the United States, based on my own personal belief systems and what I focus on in terms of the larger majority of folks in the country. But that is different from what I see in terms of the relations between the United States and the continent of Africa. So again, to me, I don't think it matters either way. I will say that, there may be some incremental change, right? Like, potentially there'll be some new treaties signed and things like that. But even those things, though, tend to come with caveats, right? So, for example, Kenya, I think, was given a pretty large lump sum of cash, if I'm not mistaken, or at least made a non-NATO ally by the United States under the Biden administration. But that also came with the request to send Kenyan police officers to Haiti, right? And so, these things are not beneficial for Kenya in any way. It's creating enemies of a foreign country that shouldn't even be enemies in a country where they don't know the people. They don't even speak the language, right? Think about this. Kenya is a former British colony. Many of the people don't speak French. Haiti is either French or Creole speaking country. So now you have folks who are coming in there who don't know the people, who are trying to police these people. And because they're a non-NATO ally, and Kenya got all excited about that, they were willing to send their they were willing to send their police to a whole foreign land, right, to establish peace in that country. And as you can imagine, it hasn't really garnered the results that I think anyone set out to make happen. It meant that the United States did not have to be looked at as the ones who were doing this, right? The U.S. could not send troops there, or not troops. They could not send police there. I don't think that would have went over well. So they decided, why don't we ask Kenya to do it? And I'm sure they might have asked a few people, and Kenya was like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. We'll just send people. We'll just send people to Haiti. Why not? So, so in my opinion, what you'll find is, as long as, like I said, as long as Africa is operating as these disparate countries, they will always be taken advantage of and used as that. And I'm not saying that if Africa as a continent didn't get together as one, wouldn't take advantage of the deals they'd have to do with other people. Imagine, because the United States is obviously 54 states. But in terms of its size of its region, right? It takes up like northern Sahara, portions of northern Saharan Africa. Imagine if Africa as a continent was able to come together as 54 states, even if they were still countries separately, because turning it into one country would be very difficult. But they just negotiated better. What I've seen is the East Africa Federation, which looks like it's forming something pretty substantial there, which may potentially be a country, may not, whatever. West African Community, the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. These two groups, they definitely talk about trade amongst each other a lot. They talk about their relationship to the African Union. What I don't see is their work to across the way to make sure that there's trade across the two groups and to work to trade outside, right? And you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not what I see. What I see is mostly groups of countries getting together to tell other groups nearby, here's how you should act, right? You guys correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I see. And so to me, that doesn't really advance the entire continent forward. The African Union, which I think is a great idea, it met well, I think is failing in that respect, right? They haven't done the job that I think most people had expected the African Union to do, which is go out and negotiate deals to further the needs and the wants of its people on the continent of Africa. So yeah, a lot of those are my thoughts. I don't see many comments today. People are really, I guess when it comes to politics, people either are really, really commenting or don't comment at all. I noticed it on the YouTube channel, and there's a couple people watching. Where are you guys watching from? So there's people watching YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. Okay. So nobody has thoughts on this? But I really like to hear from you guys. And you know what I will probably see is in the replay, people will probably put stuff in the comments. Africa Emerge says, what happens in the United States affects the world's economy and politics. That's fair. I think what happens in the United States, yes, I think it does affect the world in general, right? Just in terms of currency, et cetera, et cetera. But do you think specifically whoever's president affects the continent of Africa and how Africa emerged? I'd like to hear from you. If you think whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, do you think that depending on which one has a different impact on the continent of Africa? I'm interested to hear what you say. Watching from Florida, shout out to you for watching from Florida. But I'd like to hear what you think there, because I have my belief system, but this is supposed to be an open dialogue, right? I want to hear from you guys what you guys think. Quadro says, are you voting in the U.S. election? I already voted. So I voted yesterday. So yes, I already voted. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for. But I think if you guys listen to commentary long enough from me and you hear about the policies that I care about, you might get an idea of which way I lean, right or left. Okay. So AFRICOM U.S. military base in Ghana and Cold War with China, Russia happened with either president. There you go. That's an interesting opinion, and I think that opinion is one that's probably shared by many of the Pan-Africanists, right? These were conversations we used to have with African Stream. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go live with African Stream for a little bit of time, but update coming soon. Update coming soon on that. There's definitely an update coming soon. I'll just leave it at that. I have a conversation tomorrow to see a way forward. So I'll keep you guys posted on how that goes. Quadro says, I think the impact may be the same, to be honest. And I think that that's generally the truth, right? I mean, you know, not saying anything disparaging about the United States, because I want to keep my channel. Shout out to you, Anthony Blinken. So, you know, I would just say, you know, it just is what it is, right? You know, government moves slow purposefully, especially in the United States. And it is a feature, not a bug. It's meant to move slow because they want to take a while to make a decision, and they want to make sure that it doesn't have a terrible impact on itself, right, as a country. And so so that means that a lot of deals that are done, how those deals are made, the length of those deals, etc., also have a lot to do with you know, the way the United States wants to preserve itself moving forward, right? So, but any other thoughts? Okay, so you guys started coming in with some thoughts and ideas. I appreciate that. So to hear from you guys, I think that was interesting. So, you know, I think we got some people. So I think the general consensus from what I'm seeing here in the comments is that most people feel like it will be the same. But Africa Emerged had said, you know, what happens in the United States affects the world's economy and politics. I'd love to hear you, if you can, please type in your thoughts on what specific changes or impact you think you would see in Africa. And those of you who are joining, right, we are talking about the US elections and how it's going to impact Africa. I myself have already voted yesterday, did a little early voting. Excuse me, where I'm located, the polling station is actually a museum. So went to the museum. Oh, was it a museum? A museum or a library? It's a museum. So I went to the museum and I voted yesterday. I know some people who are voting opposite of how I voted, which is interesting. It's a point of contention sometimes with people. But yeah, so you know, I know people across all socioeconomic statuses, across all different areas and walks of life in the United States in terms of geographic location. And so I know people who voted on either party or wrote in. But now there's some more people are joining. I'd love to hear from you guys. Who do you guys think, if either, will have a bigger impact on the continent of Africa? Or do you think that no matter who's elected, it will be exactly the same? What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. I want to hear from you what you think. And just to give you guys a recap, where I left off was I believe that it will be the same no matter what. I honestly believe that it'll be the same no matter what. The reason why I came to that conclusion is because the continent of Africa operates as disparate individual entities. And so they each individually are operating with their own self-interest. And so, you know, they're not thinking as the collective of the continent, right? So when they're doing deals, they're doing individualized deals, and they're doing deals as a small, disparate country with much bigger countries with more influence, right? So, you know, and even countries that aren't that much bigger, those countries have more influence, right? So I think Nigeria is bigger than every single country in Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it's bigger than every single country in Europe. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just going off of memory. Algeria is as well, right? Algeria definitely is. But it disproportionately negotiates with countries that it's bigger than. Maybe because of GDP, maybe because of leadership. There may be many different reasons, but they don't come out on the other end as the side that feels happy. You know, well, they're happy they made a deal, but the people don't feel happy. So Pro Woman says, U.S. threatening visa denial for election tampering in Ghana. Trump Secretary of State wouldn't do that. Republicans don't meddle as much in African affairs, don't care, generally neglectful. Okay, so that's an interesting one, right? What Pro Woman is saying is that under a Trump election, or as under a Trump win, if there are any anomalies, etc., they wouldn't threaten visa denial. I will say, usually those are just threats. On the election tampering, they don't usually follow through, meaning on the opposite end. Just from my personal experience, when I was in Sierra Leone and the United States had said there were concerns about election tampering and that they would likely hold visas, et cetera, et cetera. They even had a list of names. And what do we find? People are traveling freely, no issues. So I do think that the U.S. does make empty threats sometimes about this whole idea of election tampering. But I will say, in defense of the folks who want to threaten visa denial, I do think they mean well, and I do think the idea is an important one. The problem is they only choose to do it with certain countries, right? They don't go to other countries and say the same thing, right? Or they don't take the same stance as they do when they come to the continent of Africa. So I will say that. And the other thing that I'll say, which I've said to you guys before, is it doesn't even matter who the president is. In general, President of the United States does not always meet with the heads of states in Africa. They'll have the Secretary of State meet with them. Maybe the Vice President will meet with them. They don't even travel to the continent of Africa, right? Most American presidents travel to the continent of Africa after they were done being president. Many of them do not travel during their presidency. They just don't see a need because, you know what, African countries bow at the feet of America, almost all. Now, not all of them. The Sahel states definitely in a different place, but that just is how it is, right? So if think about it like this, right? Why would I travel to your house, get out in the cold, get in the car, do the navigation, go all the way to your house, if I can say, why don't you just come to my house? And you're like, yes, please. Yes, please. I'll be there immediately. When do you want me to be there? Why would I get up and go? And so, again, it's because of leverage, right? So, it's just, I know that was maybe a strange metaphor, but it's true, right? Just think about that. Okay, so Daniel McLean says, when are we going to stand up and vote for the 6th region of the African Union? That's a good point. A lot of people talk about the 5 regions of Africa and that 6th region being the diaspora. And that's the Caribbean and the Americas. Well, I guess the Caribbean is part of the Americas. I just had this conversation with some people earlier today. So the Americas in general, right? That's the diaspora in the Americas, or outside, not even just the Americas, just outside of the continent of Africa. It's important, but I think, how do you determine who gets included in that, right? Because obviously there are a lot of people who identify a lot of different ways. So is it supposed to be those people who are first generation Americans, those people who were born there, who live here, which is a different thing? Is it people who have black skin, but then again, well, not black skin, but darker skin, melanated skin, what was considered black and white in a previous world and a time? How do you determine who gets considered part of that 6th region of the African Union, right? And I think that is a fair question to ask, and it's hard to determine who that is. Do I think Africans in the diaspora should have a say about what happens on Africa as long as they are participating? Yes, but how do you determine who that is, and what level of participation do they get? Right? Because again, we're talking about 54 disparate countries, and you have all of this separated diaspora, right? So, I think that there's a lot to take into consideration. It's not just a simple question and answer as it pertains to that. But this is good stuff so far. I appreciate you guys putting your thoughts in here and really coming to the table with some interesting viewpoints. So what else can I say? As I know people are, okay, so here we go. Pro Woman says, African nations like Black elected officials aren't in the position to demand what they want. Told this is what will give you no leverage to force good deals. Right. Yeah. So You're right, right? And I think that that's really where we are is again, each one of them, but it's only because I want to be clear. I want to be very clear on this. There are people who are prejudiced based on race, color, whatever, right? However, however, people deal with people, especially in the world of capitalism, based on leverage. As much as there might be people who are prejudiced and who do not want to do business with Africa, they would still do business with Africa and deal with Africa in a different way if Africa as a continent operated as one entity when it was negotiating deals. An example of that is this: Saudi Arabia. Let me be careful how I discuss this. From what I understand, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, 90% of the people who were on those planes on the tragic day of September 11, 2001, were Saudi Arabians. There's a lot of discussions about how in school, what people are taught in terms of their ideology around the United States and the West in Saudi Arabia. There are things like women weren't allowed to drive, they weren't allowed to go to the movie theaters, they weren't allowed to go out on their own up until MBS took over the last couple of years, maybe 8 years, 10 years, whatever it was. You notice that the United States did very little in publicly shaming or addressing their belief system around how Saudi Arabia was responding. Also, as it pertains to LGBTQ plus issues, the United States does very little in terms of pushing social ideology on Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia does, what was the number, $150 billion a year in arms purchases from the United States. Let me see what the number is. I think it was yeah, I don't know what the number is, but I've heard something like 150 billion. You know, some version of that, right? And so if that's the case, then the United States, maybe they may have some issues with some of the things that happen there. They may have some issues with some of the people there, the leaders. But you know what? If they're buying $150 billion worth of arms and there's some other trade going on, the United States will have a deal that's more equal, like equal playing field. You know, when the United States meets with Saudi Arabia, they meet with Saudi Arabia, even though it's not a democracy, right? You know, they have a royal family and all. I guess there's some version of a democracy to some degree, but it's a royal family that's ruling the country, right? When the United States meets with them, they're not forcing democracy. They're not saying we're going to take visas away if you do this and these kinds of things in your country. They're like, you guys do your thing as long as you give us money for these things. It doesn't even matter what Saudi Arabia does with the arms that they're purchasing from the United States, right? So, you know, there's been all kinds of talks about bombings of school buses and things like that, whether inadvertent or on purpose, in other countries in which Saudi Arabia is operating in. And the United States has been done very little to condemn it, right? Because of the relationship that, you know, they have financially with the US. And so I do want to just make that distinction that I don't think it's just because Africans are Black. I think it's because, you know, or whatever. I think it's just because they just don't have leverage because they continue to operate separately as separate entities. So, you know, I mean, look, Africa can continue to do that. But if we want to see a different Africa, I think that is the solution to that challenge, is operating more like a continent, a confederacy of states than operating as small separate countries. So Africa Emerged says this. Now, I will say there is some disputes about this statement. Let me say allegedly. Trump called African continent shithole countries. That is an alleged thing. It is not on tape. Africa Emerge says, I believe Trump will not invest in African affairs while VP Harris would continue to embark on building economic and political relationships. Yeah, I mean, I know that was a conversation, right? What I was saying earlier was, what does that look like in terms of real policy? What does it actually mean? What do we expect to see? And that's a question that I have. You know, it's an honest question that I have, that I would like to know. Is there any specific policy, anything in particular that is expected to be done to improve business relationships between the continent and the contiguous United States? I guess contiguous plus the other two. So yeah, that's my belief system. That's my thought. And that was really hard to do, to say all of that without saying who I support. Because, you know, it doesn't matter who I support, right? You guys aren't here about who I support in the US government, in US politics. You guys are here to hear what's going on in the continent. All right, cool. Anybody else have anything you guys want to say before we draw this thing to a close? It feels like people are starting to get a little bit more engaged, which I like to see. More people are jumping on. So shout out to you guys who are jumping on more recently. But what are your thoughts? I mean, okay, maybe let's just ask this. For those of you who are watching, who do you think is going to win? Whether you want them to win or not, type it in the comments below. Who do you think is going to win? Whether you want them to win or not, who do you think? You guys want to know who I think is going to win? I'll tell you guys in the comments after this live stream is over. I'll tell you guys in the comments after this live stream is over. So you're going to want to come back and check when this live stream becomes a video. You'll have to see what I say in the comments about who I think is going to win. Not who I want to win. Doesn't matter. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just going to tell you who I think is going to win. All right, so we got Sheku saying he thinks Harris is going to win. All right, so Sheku thinks Harris is going to win. Any other thoughts? Anybody else have any thoughts on who they think is going to win? Not who you want to win, who do you think is going to win? Okay, Quadwell says, I think Harris will win by a slight margin. Interesting. Africa Emerge says Harris. Obviously, Africa Emerge looks like Africa Emerge wants Harris to win, judging by the emojis afterwards. Okay, that's interesting. So I know this is not representative of everybody, but 3 folks here said they think Harris will win without saying who they, you know, without, like, it's not who you want to win, it's just who you think will win. That's interesting. Like I said, I'll tell you guys after this is over. Okay, Pro Woman says, I'm voting for Kamala. The judiciary is too important. Can't have the court stacked with right-wing judges. Harris barely wins. Okay, so Pro Woman has said who she wants to win and thinks Harris will win. I will say this. Polling is saying some things. One of the things that we know to be true is nothing is constant. Okay, nothing is constant. If I'm not mistaken, there has been 37 or 38 elections in the United States. I know there's 45 presidents, but somebody one day I heard say that number, 37 elections. I'm like, but there's 45 presidents. But I think in some cases things happen where presidents had to take over for others, et cetera, et cetera. But in that case, there's not a lot of polling that can tell you really much of anything out of only 37 of anything that's ever happened, especially when the parties flipped in terms of their belief systems and how they move at a certain point in time in the recent years. So Blueprint, spoken like a true Trump supporter. If they don't cheat, Trump. Okay, got it. Seku says, I think there's just too much of a bad taste of Trump still, a lot of people's minds. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, sure, for some people. For others, they are doubling down, right? I mean, as Blueprint says here, if they don't cheat, Trump. You know, look, I will say this. I will absolutely say this. Polling right now is saying it's very close. And what we've seen in the last couple of elections, midterms and general, it's usually light for Trump as it pertains to polling. Now, it seems now more than ever, people who support Trump are louder than they have been in the past, and from different groups who used to not be loud Trump supporters. So specifically, one demographic group is young Black males have, increased in support for somebody like Donald Trump, and not only have increased in support, but increased in vocal support. And so the question is, do those polls still operate that same way? So for example, they would say, if you're within 3, you're within the margin of error, right? It can be any one way or another. But if you're up by 5 over Trump, then you're maybe only up by 1, right? If you're a Democrat, whatever, generic Democrat Trump. If Trump's ahead or equal, then it's expected that he is pretty far ahead, because of what they say, people are shyer, and, when it comes to saying they're, when somebody calls them and says, who'd you vote for, or whatever, people can tend to be a little bit more shy. It doesn't seem like that this time around. So it may be just as close as they say it is. Okay, yeah, I've already said that. So yeah, it may be closer. It may be closer this time around, and I guess we will find out potentially tomorrow or potentially Wednesday. So I will be going live next Monday again. At that point in time, we will likely have determined the outcome of this election. There are going to be, no matter what, a large lump sum of the United States is going to be disappointed. I do think that if Kamala Harris wins, there will be many Trump supporters who, again, will say it was rigged. I do think if Donald Trump wins, there will be many Kamala Harris supporters that will be upset that there wasn't a true primary for the allowance of a vote to determine who should be the Democratic nominee. I think either way, people are going to be very upset, and they're going to blame something, right? There will be a blame, and that blame will lead to one or two potential outcomes, right? So, on the right side of the political aisle, the political right, I think that blame would go to government and election workers and all of that. And I think in that case, there may be a strong push to make some changes. I think if it's the other way around, I don't think Democrats will change much of anything, because at the end of the day, Democrats almost always get support from most of their core constituencies. It's where changes on the margin sometimes, and turnout, I think, is the big thing. So yeah, that's my thought process. Africa Emerge says, if Iowa State's recent poll results are accurate, VP Harris will win in a landslide. Yeah, so let's speak to that. So Iowa, well, there was an Iowa poll recently, and the person who does this poll, and forgive me, I don't know her name, she has been right almost 90% of the time. She might say Democrats are going to win by 7, they win by 8. Or she might say Democrats are going to win by 9 and they win by 7. Or she said that Trump was going to win and he did win. And in the margin of her error was within 1 point. So if she says Trump wins by 3, he wins by 2, or wins by 4. And so there was just one time that she got it wrong, and it was a 5-point differential, where I think she said Democrats were going to win by 3. Win by 2, but they lost by 3 or whatever. So I think it's a 5-point differential where she was wrong. So many people are looking at that recent poll that came out yesterday afternoon and are shocked by it, because Iowa was never supposed to be in contention, right? It used to be a blue state under Barack Obama. They voted blue, and under the previous 8 years, it went red. Blueprint says, hopefully Salon chooses BRICS and aligns with Russia. Whew. Okay, so here's what I'll say about this. Unlikely. I think that Sierra Leone will align with BRICS necessarily for a couple of different reasons. most of Sierra Leone's leadership goes to college in the United States. Most of them get their medical treatment done in the United States. Many have been able to seek asylum or other things because of the United States, in the United States. It's very unlikely that they would shift alliances to a complete separate place on the planet from where they have a little bit of an understanding, where they have homes, where their children go to college, all that kind of stuff, right? That doesn't mean they won't do deals with Russia, right? Because there's the Russia-Africa summits that's happened, China-Africa summit. So they're doing deals with whoever they can do deals with. Whoever's sending money, they're doing deals with. But I really don't think we'll see Sierra Leone and BRICS anytime soon. And also, BRICS also has to want Sierra Leone in it. It's the BRICS plus 6 now. And there are other people who are adopting the BRICS idea of currency, etc. But the BRICS plus 6 is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then don't get me to guessing all the other countries. I think Saudi Arabia, Iran is in there now, and I think Egypt. And there was one other African country that joined, and there was a few other countries. I think Argentina joined, but I say the BRICS plus 6. So yeah, but so far, as far as I understand, there's only 3 out of the 54 countries that are part of BRICS. And there's a process, right, to get approved. I mean, so that's a process. Phoenix Indigo says, I don't see how anyone attempting to overthrow the government gets a chance to do it again. So that's speaking to her belief system about Donald Trump. And, I think, and with what happened January 6, 2020, right? I presume that's what you're speaking to. Many people don't see that as an insurrection. Many people do. It is an interesting world we live in where we don't operate from the same place. You know what I like to do for people? When I'm talking to people and they're like, how come nobody sees something the way I see it, right? How come nobody sees something the way I see it, right? And I always show them 2 people are looking at this, right? Oh, it's backwards. Sorry. Let's try that again. It's backwards. So let me, yeah. So 2 people are looking at this, right? Now, depending on where you're standing, you see this, which is a 9, or if you're standing on the other side, you see this, which is a 6. But you're looking at the same thing. That is where we are in American politics today. Everybody's looking at the same thing, but they're looking at it from 2 different angles. So the person standing over here, right? They see a 9. Oops. What's going on? They see a 9. The person standing over here sees a 6. And so that is how I think we are as a country, how we're operating. And so we might be looking at the same thing, but see it from 2 completely different angles. So specifically this, there are folks that will argue to the death that the protests with Black Lives Matter were way worse than what happened at the Capitol. They'll mention that, well, what happened at the Capitol, you'll hear people say, I've seen footage that shows people just walking through or the police letting them through. If this was really a threat, why would they just let them through? And then obviously there are people on the other side of it like, well, why was Mike Pence scared for his life? Or why were they all hiding in certain chambers, right? I think that, why would somebody, experience loss of life if it wasn't a real threat? And it's very interesting, right? Because what you have is you have people who are on opposite sides of, generally, who are taking opposite sides when it comes to that particular instance. For example, you'll have people who, in general, don't love the police, but then they will defend the actions of a police officer who took lethal force on someone climbing through the Capitol window, right? And then in the same vein, there'll be those who, Blue Lives Matter, we need more funding for the police, etc., who will say, the police at the Capitol that day, I don't believe them. So it's really interesting to see how people take different stances and approaches when it suits them. That's what I'll say. Again, I'm speaking about this from my viewpoint, looking at how everybody is looking at this. Because again, I know people on either sides of the political aisle. I stand where I stand. I stand 10 tones down on what I believe in. But I also do see where other people believe from their own perspective. And I also do see nuance. I see nuance in everything, even if I might disagree completely with someone else's belief system or standpoint. I do see nuance, and I do see that there are different ways to look at things, right? Kwame is here. Kwame says hi, sir, and everyone. I appreciate you calling me sir. That's like, never mind, not gonna do that. But yes, appreciate it. Anybody else? Anything else before we go? Now, okay, so it's been almost an hour. It's actually been over an hour. We started a little later than initially anticipated, but it has actually been an hour. I know it's getting late in West Africa right now. I appreciate people are still just joining, which is great. Because of course we want to hear from everybody. But does anybody have any final thoughts before we go? Oh, here's what I will say to you. And you can have your own opinions on this if you want. But I think it's your civic duty, no matter where you are in the world, to exercise your vote. So I definitely recommend you vote. I know who I want you to vote for, regardless of what country you're in. I know who I want you to vote for, but I would say vote. Exercise your right to vote. People have died for the ability to vote in this country. And as long as people are skeptical about the vote, there will always be an issue. And I will say this, vote in the primaries. Vote in the primaries. That's super important. Primaries are the reason why people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in the House, which, people on the progressive left support. And primaries are a reason why Marjorie Taylor Greene is in the House, which people on the right support. And, and they both beat incumbents from their own party. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Marjorie Taylor Greene beat a Republican. I know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez unseated someone who was there for like 40 years. Like, he was like senior level person. So, but right now, primaries are long over. So all you have is the general. And I say vote in the general. I definitely think you should vote in the general elections. So if you guys are joining late, I would say go back and watch from the beginning. Just all you have to do is pull your cursor all the way back to the beginning, and you can watch from the beginning. You can see I started with a video from DW showing who they would like to see, asking Africans on the ground who they would like to see as president of the United States. And it was interesting to hear their viewpoints and why. And then I went into my thought process about who's better for the continent and why. So Blueprint says the Dems are pushing the one world government agenda and Trump is a nationalist, America first. Yeah. So, the framing of that I think is interesting, but in general, both political parties in general believe in, longer, more strategic deals externally. But there are people within either party, Trump in this case, in terms of his rhetoric, I'll say, and then other people who haven't won on the Democratic side who also feel that way, that are more nationalist. Like Bernie Sanders was more on the nationalist kind of side as well. They're just economically in two different places in terms of who they think financing should go to and all that kind of stuff. Pro Woman says, either way, we've got a major work to do, folks. You ready? Gaining the Africa we want won't be a cakewalk. Let's organize and tap into our collective power. I like that. Let's organize and tap into our collective power. Let us do that for sure. Sure. All right, guys, it's been it's been an hour and 6 minutes. Tomorrow is election day. As I mentioned, I've already voted. So you guys do your part, get out there and vote. And yeah, I'm interested to hear next week what you guys thought of the election, who you voted for, and if you're happy with the results. I see people just joining, so thanks for joining. For those of you who just came on, if you want to see the full thing, hit that slider, go all the way back to the beginning. I guess it's this way. Yeah, hit that slider, go back to the beginning that way, and watch from the beginning. I think you'll find it interesting. Any final words before we go? Almost every time I go to end the live stream, somebody sends a message to say something right at the very last second. So I want to give people a second to say what the last couple of things anybody wants to say, and then we'll go. So Phoenix Indigo says, here we go. So another comment. I think some things are objectively wrong. I'm independent and don't trust either side, but I'm not interested in the nouveau Jim Crow they're trying to usher forth with Project 2025. Okay. Nouveau Jim Crow. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, look. How do I discuss this? I think Project 2025 is interesting. It's very long. And there are some interesting things in there. I wouldn't say Jim Crow in particular, but just overall, there are things in there which Trump has distanced himself from. But I think JD Vance has mentioned, he wrote the foreword for a book that one of the people who wrote the Project 2025 did, or the other way around. One of them wrote the foreword for his book. Anyway, here's what I will say. Project 2025, there are a couple things that is in Project 2025 that I personally read, and I'd like to get people's thoughts at another time. Department of Education, gone. Department of Health, gone. So, do you guys think it's important to have a Department of Health? Do you guys think it's important to have a Department of Education? You guys decide if you guys think it's important. They also plan to prosecute people who watch adult film. Not only who watch, but those who participate in adult film. It will be criminally illegal. I know that that's not something people like to talk about publicly, but I'm pretty sure many of you indulge from time to time in adult film. That would be illegal. There are many things too. It's long. I didn't read all of it. I've gotten bits and pieces. I had access to the document. It's like 800 pages or whatever it was. So I looked at a couple things. People who I trust on either side of the aisle giving their viewpoints on it. And I've heard out people who want to get rid of the Department of Education. And they make valid points. And then I've heard people on the other side who say you absolutely cannot get rid of the Department of Education, who also make valid points. To be honest, I lean more towards you kind of need free education, public schools. Now, my other belief system is that I think that, and I've mentioned this previously, I think that those who participate in government, their children should have to go to public schools, and they and their children should have to go to public hospitals. I guarantee you that public hospitals and public schools would be way different if the politicians had to have their children and they themselves attend those places. Just think about that. I don't even know if that's an original idea. It feels original to me, but I've been rolling with it and I like it. That's my belief system. I think you change a lot if you're required to do it. And by the way, that is not just in America. I believe in Africa, African politicians should do the same thing. You should force your children to go to the schools there, not the international schools, the local schools. And you should all have to do the same healthcare that the average person in your country has to take. I guarantee you the healthcare and education in every country around the world, if everybody was required to do that to be elected into office, would be very different. That is my belief system. So Blueprint says Department of Education is a scam, indoctrination over education. I don't disagree that that it is indoctrination overall. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I do disagree with the idea of eliminating it completely, though. You know, I think there's nuance, right? I think that it is an important institution if done correctly, and to just tear it out completely, or dismantle it even over time, and you leave it in the hands of a private system, you know, most people won't be able to afford education. Maybe more people go to homeschooling. Maybe you'll get like community education over time, but I think you lose an entire generation, maybe two. And then even still, once you get to that, how are you ensuring that America is able to keep up, right? Because I went to a private school for underprivileged kids. We had access to all of everything. And I will tell you that even with access to everything, I can't keep up. Like I remember working with a Pakistani guy in 2012. And I remember we would just do like, you know, I always say I don't do math in public. And I would say it as a joke. But, you know, I have an American education. I mean, come on. It's tough. It's tough to do math when you have an American education. I remember like at some point, I stopped even trying to do things. I stopped even calculating it. I would just ask him. He could just do the math in his head. And I was like, man, we are in. We're in for it. This is like 2012, 2013, 2014. I worked with this guy. I worked with him at two different companies in 2014. And I remember, and I recruited him to a secondary company that I worked at. And because obviously this guy was incredibly smart and gifted. But the way he would talk about it was like, we all learn this. We all know this. You guys don't learn this stuff? I was like, nope. So anyway, I do believe it's an important institution. It could use some work. I would not say to get rid of it though. That's where I land on that. Blueprint says they have dumb children down to with their policies. Okay, I guess that's the politicians he's talking about. Not all politicians' children are dumb though. They're not all dumb, to be clear. So I wouldn't say that. All right. I asked you guys for a couple more comments. We got a few. But look, it's been an hour and 13 minutes. I have some deadlines I have to do for my day job. So I do need to get back to work. But I want to thank you guys all for participating. This has been an interesting one. And you know what I want you guys to do? I also want you guys to put in the comments who you think I voted for. Who do you guys think I voted for? And I'm going to tell you who I think is going to win in the comments below. But I'm interested to see who you think I voted for. And then stay tuned to see who I think is going to win. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, but I want to see who you guys think. Pro Woman says, critical thinking and creativity are strengths of American education. Excuse me. Yes, I would say yes. I don't disagree with that. There are strengths. Sure. Quadro said, thanks for your time, bro. You voted for Trump, I think. Interesting. Okay. Blueprint says, I'm in the education system, witnessing it. It's criminal. Yeah, I also have some family in the education system as well. You know, it's interesting to know who people think I vote for when I don't give any details on policies that I care about. You know, some people will go, you know, maybe you voted for like Marianne Williamson, or some people will be like, you know, you probably wrote in a candidate, or some people like Trump, some people say Harris. Like I said, I won't say. Interesting. Okay. So we got one says thinks I voted for Trump. I wonder why you think I voted for Trump. I'm interested to hear that. And because Blueprint says I think Trump, you're a businessman. Okay. And Pro Woman says you voted for Trump as a protest vote against the Dems. So Blueprint and Pro Women both gave their reasons why they think I voted for who they think I voted for. Protest votes against the Dems is an interesting one. Okaho says, watching from Denver, Colorado, freedoms worldwide, freedoms. Shout out to freedom. Yeah. Shout out to Denver, Colorado. I was just there earlier this year, about 4 months ago, 5 months ago now. The time is flying. I can't even remember. But yeah, I was in Denver, Colorado. Had a great time. Good time. Good time out in Denver. Walking to the local grocery store, listening to my podcast. Anyway, anybody else? I'd like to hear from you guys in the comments, but you guys can do that in the replay because we're gonna bring this thing to a close. Again, I'm not gonna say who I'm voting for, but you got 3 people saying Trump. That's interesting. Like I said, I will not indicate either way, but I will indicate who I think is going to win in the comments. Phoenix. Okay, one more thing. One more comment before we go. Phoenix Indigo says, I'm in between. You're a critical thinker, but a lot of otherwise reasonable and intelligent Black men are swinging conservative because they like his rhetoric. That is true. That is true. That is everything you said there is true. But it doesn't mean I'm gonna vote one way or another based on that, though. But that is true. There is a large constituency of young male voters voting Republican this time around, and those who voted for Barack Obama too. That is true. But Phoenix Indigo says, I have no idea, and that was the purpose, right? The purpose is for you to not know. But you know what's funny is like people who know me who are watching this are clear on who I'm voting, no question. Regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, I make it very clear in my personal life. Don't have any problems with you if you vote one way or the other, but you know we can debate it, we can talk about it. But yeah, I have my belief system. And by the way, I will say this here. I was closer to another side of the aisle 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Jesus, 20 years ago. Yikes. 20 years ago, I was closer to the other side of the political aisle than I am now. I built my belief systems and found policies that I care more about in the more recent years. So I'll say that is the only hint I'll give you. The only hint I'll give you. Phoenix Indigo says, I wish I did because we have to clean up ish for everyone. And when she says we, I think she means Black women. That's the BW, the quotes in the parentheses. That is one thing that people do say. Black women do carry the vote for the Democrats, if that's that's the political aisle, the side of the political aisle you're on. Phoenix Indigo says, so once the state starts snipping more of us with qualified immunity. I see where you're going with that. Yes, I see where you're going with that. That's an interesting one. Yeah, I say just get out and vote. Everybody should get out and vote. But with that, guys, we will take this conversation to the comments. It has been an hour and 20 minutes, and I thank you all for joining. I wish all of you who are vocal now were on a little bit earlier, but I know that the YouTube algorithm doesn't always put it in front of you right away. So I appreciate you guys joining. As always, I'm interested to see in the playback who you think I'm voting for. Put in the comments of the playback. I'm interested to see it, and we will discuss who I think is going to win in the comments, and then we will discuss who ended up winning and my thoughts next Monday. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. I will see you guys all on the next video.